Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan and, well, we've already talked about the campaign and now it's time to talk about the units. You see, Senesh's roster is rather small, yet has a lot of different variants, each of them doing something completely different, and you can get a lot of variety from them. And now that I've had a decent amount of time playing with the Seneshi roster, the faction as a whole and so on, I want to go over each individual unit and give you my thoughts about how they perform, what they're good at, what they're bad at, and so on, as there's a lot to discuss. A lot of people were kind of curious about this faction mainly because, well, it's mostly focused around moving quite quickly, but you still have a decent damage output. So let's not waste any more time and jump right in. So we're going to talk about the Marauders of Slaanesh, and we're going to talk about them for a while as there's 3 different variants. This is a completely new unit. Yes, we do have Chaos Marauders, but these are actually Seneshi Marauders. So what they've done is taken the mounted variant from the Hellstriders and put them on foot, which is something that tabletop players wanted for a very, very long time. Not only that, but we have a new weapon variant too, as we never had one with hand weapons, sword infantry. They technically had hand weapons, but it was never really represented on the tabletop. They never really had a piece for that, as they were always represented with spears or hellscourges, so this is quite exciting. The unit itself is low tier. You get these basically at the very beginning of your campaign. However, that doesn't mean that it's not very good. The Marauders themselves are shielded, they're anti-infantry, they're pretty fast for mortals too. Not too quick, but they're able to do a lot of damage. Now, they do have some good bonuses to them, like being immune to psychology, which is very, very useful, especially since you're going to be fighting against loads of other demons and big monsters and so on in this universe. And if you decide to boost them up a little bit, you can increase their capabilities to make them a bit more better through technology and obviously skills. These are your basic frontline, and it's going to be very obvious throughout all the different Marauders that you use. They're not there to be the best units, but they're there to hold down the enemy whilst you start flanking around with your Demonets, your Chariots, your Seekers, and so on. If we move on to the Spear variants, it's very much the same. However, obviously with Spear, they're anti-large, and again, you're going to be dealing with a lot of large monsters. These are quite cool. I don't know how they're able to hold up these mutations quite well. But then again, this is Warhammer, so logic kind of falls off with that. Again, a new unit, as we've said, they're very, very cool. I really love the look of them because they're using the helmeted version here, and it's just really nice to see dedicated Seneshi Marauders. I must say I still use them in later game, as anti-large does help. You do have a lot of anti-large options when it comes to your Marauders, but I feel like the foot variant is usually better as they kind of work as a very good tactic whilst you're flanking around. They're also quite fast too, like I said, the stats themselves aren't bad. Like, yeah, it's a Marauder, but it's still got a decent stat line. You'll obviously replace the sword variant with these if you can. It's depending on what you can afford, because they're both in the same tier building. It's more of the case that the Spearmen are more expensive in both purchasing and obviously upkeep. Now, out of the 3 variants, I'd say that the Hellscourge version is probably my favorite. You've got Shielded, Meat Shield as before, but you've also got Defender. These guys can take a punch and they can throw a punch back. If you focus on buffing them up a little bit, they'll also be able to do quite a decent amount of damage. I really, really like these. I must admit that this was my favorite variant of the mounted version, especially on the tabletop, but we'll get to that when we actually talk about those. I'd say that you've got a lot of different options. It would have been nice if we would have had maybe one more, like a throwing axe version or javelin version. But then again, beggars can't be choosers. I'd still say that you still get a decent amount of them. It's also a very new unit. It's something stylized to fit with the Slaanesh theme quite well. While they're not the best unit in terms of stats, keep in mind that Slanesh's stats do vary depending on what you're actually looking for. I'd say that even in late game and in harder difficulties, I've been using them. You know, being immune to psychology and having anti-large and so on is very, very useful, especially once you start dealing with the other Chaos factions. It's obviously up to your playstyle on how and what you need. Now, keep in mind, I might sound like I'm being a bit biased because it's Slaanesh, but there are some units that I don't like, so we'll get into that a little bit later. Just putting a little disclaimer here because I don't want people to think that I'm just being biased because this is Slaanesh. But now we can move on to the Demonets, which you'll have access at the very beginning of your campaign. You can start recruiting them straight away. They have access to armor piercing very fast, magical attacks, devastating flanker, meaning that you want to flank with these units, and this is the case with most of the Seneshi stuff, and then obviously a pretty high physical resistance. Now, when it comes to the Demonets of Slaanesh, you can see 54 speed. They are really, really good at getting around the enemy and hitting them from the side. This is why I said that you need Marauders too. It's very important to note that these are not a frontline unit. This is the exact same way in how they worked in the tabletop. You wanted to get into the flank to do more damage. They're squishy. They very much are. You can tell that they've got very little armor because, well, they're pretty much just wearing bikinis. That being said, if you can slam them into your side of the enemy, especially if you're holding them down with some Marauders, you're going to be able to do a lot of damage. I've tested this with a few different enemies, more specifically the Chaos Warriors of Khorne, as they're heavy armored and they pack a good punch, but these were surprisingly good. The Demonets were able to do a lot of damage. Though the standard Demonets might not last as long in your roster as, say, for example, the Marauders, as you have the Exalted Demonets of Slaanesh, mainly because of their passive ability known as Soul Scent, which you'll notice in a lot of your demons, your higher tier ones. This basically makes your stuff stronger as the enemy morale starts wavering, and since you have access to, say, for example, the Law of Shadow and the Law of Slaanesh, which you can do some heavy damage and you can also reduce some leadership, you're going to get these benefits quite early on. It's very much depending on how you actually use the spells and what you do with other different things. Obviously, flanking does help too, as they do have devastating flanker. They've got armor piercing, very fast once again, and falling attacks. These are surprisingly really good, considering that, yes, they're still very squishy, but they're able to rip apart anything, which is what you expect from Slaaneshi demons. I would suggest that if you do use the Demonets, both Exalted and normal, that you keep an Allures around them with the Locus of Grace, just to be able to make sure that they're a bit tankier, or else they'll start dying quickly if you get hit from, say, for example, the flank, if there's an Uno reverse card. Okay, now we're getting into the really cool stuff, with the first one being the Hellstriders of Slaanesh. These have a special passive ability known as Soul Harvesters, which makes them a lot tankier and better at charging as they kill enemy units. They've also got access to Vanguard. They're anti-large because their weapon is a spear. They're very, very fast, 100 speed. This is going to be a very common thing when you start playing as the Slaaneshi stuff. Anything mounted is usually really, really fast. And they've also got access to poison attacks too. These are your basic charges. You can use them in late game too, because anti-large is very useful. Even if they're mounted, they'll be able to do a decent amount of damage to, say, Bloodthirsters or Great Unclean Ones and so on, so you're going to want to keep them around, especially if you're going for a really mobile army, which is pretty much what you want with Slaanesh. If you're not using Marauders on foot and Demonets, you want to have something akin to pretty much just cavalry and chariots, and it might not be easy to get used to, however, it is very satisfying. Like I said, 100 speed is really, really good. You're going to be able to just work around the enemy without finding too much of a counter. By the time they start kind of just reforming and so on, you've already hit them from multiple sides. I love these units. I've loved them on the tabletop too. I think I've got like 10 boxes of them built and painted up, and I've still got like a few more, mainly because it's just cool. Like, the Marauders look awesome, and obviously Seekers are just really fun. Now, this is further enhanced when you start looking on the other variant, which is the Hellstriders with Hellscourgers, which are anti-infantry, very fast, poison attacks once again. Obviously, they're both shielded, and they've got access to the same abilities. They're immune to psychology. They also have fear too. These are pretty good. These are really, really good. Again, 100 speed, which makes you just zoom across the battlefield. I've been using a bit of a mix of both, because the anti-infantry variant is very, very good, but you're also going to be dealing with a lot of monsters too in late game, so it very much depends as to what you're actually fighting against. That being said, both of them have been staples in my army. You will definitely need to buff them up a little bit to make them more useful in later game, as, yeah, they can be a little squishy. Keep in mind that obviously these are mortal and not demon. I personally would have given them a little bit of extra physical resistance because they are mounted on demonic mounts. Maybe that would have helped a little bit, but other than that, I have got no complaints regarding these. Yeah, there's a little bit of bias from the tabletop and so on, but then again, you guys expected that from me. So now we can move on to the Seekers of Slaanesh, which can perform a little bit better. Once again, armor piercing, very fast, poison attacks, 100 speed, magical attacks. They've also got fear. They're also able to have a better physical resistance too, due to the fact that they're all demon. They're useful, and you'll be using these two here. The thing is that, obviously, you want the Marauders because of the anti-large, especially if you're going for a full cav build, which is going to be quite common, I'd say, later game. But the standard version are quite good too, because due to the fact that they had the physical resistance, they're a bit tankier, and you kind of want those to take the brunt whilst you then work around with the Marauders, which are squishier. It's a bit of a synergize type of thing. You need to use both mortal and demon, from my experience. There is a lot more demons than mortal, however, so it does depend, and it obviously does focus around on your playstyle. I kind of like the healthy mix, but it very much falls under the player specifically. You will start to replace them all, however, as soon as you get access to Heartseekers. Now, these are really, really good. They've got Soul Scent once again, which makes them stronger as the enemy leadership starts wavering and so on. Once again, quite easy to do. Armor piercing, very fast, poison attacks. These are the Exalted Seekers of Slaanesh, and they can pack a great punch. The thing is, again, a little bit squishy, but still able to do quite a lot of damage. Incredible speed. You're going to be hearing that a lot, by the way. Like, there's a lot of stuff which is just ridiculously fast. fast. But the Heartseekers are so good for, in fact, that even myself, which is just horrible for multiplayer, I've been able to play a few games with some other creators and I've won, which is, for me, incredible. Like, I'm not even joking, I am trash at multiplayer, but the Heartseekers can do a lot of damage. They're just really, really nice to use. It will take a bit of time before you're able to recruit them, as they are pretty much a late game unit. However, as soon as you do, start replacing them, if you can afford it, of course, as they're pretty good. They're really, really good. One thing I've been using them for is picking out any stragglers throughout the enemy armies and so on, and then just clashing through the back as my Marauders start dealing with the main brunt. They are very strong, but you won't be able to doomstack them. I'd say the Slaanesh does take benefit from more varied armies. However, doomstacking Keeper of Secrets are very possible, and we'll talk about that a bit later. But definitely mixing up your forces with Slaanesh will be very, very useful. Now let's start off with the Chariots, as there's a few different ones here. First being the Seeker Chariots, again, armor-piercing, anti-infantry, very fast. You're going to notice a pattern here, because this is very Slaanesh-y. They've also got magical attacks. They are very, very good at doing some damage. They're very fast, again, 100 speed. Pretty much anything that you have that's mounted is 100, and they are really, really good. The fact is, what you're getting is Razor Blades. You're getting mounted Razor Blades. They are really good at harassing your enemy. You've got a decent amount of entities. I'm on Ultra at the moment, and they're able just to throw themselves in and just cut right through any paths. I've tested this on hordes of enemies and so on. I'm a big fan of these on the tabletop. It's pretty much what made me start collecting Slaanesh a bit more competitively, and it's pretty much how it works here too. I am just in love with these Chariots. I think that they're really, really strong. You can get them a bit better, especially when you start getting the other variants, but for a very early Chariot, these are devastating. Keep in mind that these are considered higher tier units and so on, so it will take a while to be able to get them. However, you're fine as you progress, and you will start to replace them early on, especially when you get to the Hellflayers, because they have Soul Scent, making them a lot stronger. They're able to do more armor-piercing damage and more melee attack as the enemy starts wavering, so it's pretty much a use of both. You can use the basic ones just to crash in, and then the Hellflayers to make sure that they're safe, coming second. And come on, they're super cool. I mean, look at that. This is the definite Razor Blade. It's something which is very intimidating to see. These were pretty decent on the tabletop, but they're much better here. Again, my main testing thing was the Chaos Warriors of Khorne, because that's the most heavily armored stuff that you'll more or less see, barring some Cathay and stuff. But, you know, Slaanesh versus Khorne is a great way to test stuff. You will need to start upgrading them by the time that you start recruiting them, however, because it will be into the point that you're going to start dealing with some bigger monsters and so on. Keep in mind that if you're dealing with a faction which deals with a lot of monsters, you're not going to be at the best point, but if you're dealing with a lot of infantry armies, you're just going to win a lot. But then we move on to the last Chariot version, which is the Exalted Seeker Chariot, and as you can see, it's absolutely massive. It's a single entity. You can doomstack these. I've been using them for a while. They've got Perfect Vigor, which makes them super, super good to use in long battles. They're armor-piercing, anti-infantry, very fast again, 100 speed. Like, the speed here is not going to be an issue. If you want a Sonic the Hedgehog faction, you've literally got it here with the Seekers and anything to do with Slaanesh. They are really, really powerful. The only thing is, obviously, being single entities and being so large means that, yes, they will suffer from wounds, and they will be targeted, especially in multiplayer and so on. The AI does target sometimes, but if you can zoom around, this isn't too much of an issue. Crashing directly into your enemy is perfectly fine. Flanking is even better, though, but you should be fine just crashing straight in. I mean, you can see the absolute size of it. It's not going to slow down. It's huge, it's damaging, it's there just to do damage. I really wish that we had access to some more terrifying units to be able to test this against, like, say, for example, Black Orcs, but I'm assuming that they're not going to have too much of an issue just to carve their way through those. I'll be very honest with you, the Chaos Furies of Slaanesh I've barely used, and I can't even remember what building it is to be able to recruit them. Yeah, they've got decent stats for Chaos Furies, armor piercing, very fast, Vanguard deployment, and obviously then you've got access to, say, for example, Devastating Flanker, and 110 speed is nothing to sniff at. It's even faster than your Chariots. But the fact that they're the only flyer makes them prime targets. They'll be kind of knocked out quite quickly. I'd say because all of your Seekers, just the Hellstriders or the Seekers themselves, have access to Vanguard, you are fine. You don't really need the Chaos Furies, as you've already got something else which can hit a lot harder, is able to do a lot more damage, and just has a lot more functionality than the Chaos Furies. I'd say throughout the whole roster, this is probably the unit that I just didn't bother using that much. I used them in a few battles just to test them out, but I just couldn't find too much functionality. Obviously, you as the player might find something else to be able to use them for, but again, it's Chaos Furies. I found them more useful for, say, Nurgle or Khorne or even Tzeentch, but just not with Slaanesh. Then again, we've seen Chaos Furies in a total of 5 different rosters because the Demon Prince also has access to them, so it was going to be bound that we're going to find something that just wasn't useful. Especially once you start looking towards, say, for example, the spawn of Slaanesh, which, yes, is another recolor or reskin, whatever you want to call it. It's probably very useful here with Slaanesh, more so than it has been for others, because, again, you don't pack that much of a punch. You mostly focus on cycle charging and so on. Having something that can just slap and do damage, it's also unbreakable and so on. It's got Sephora Musk. It's pretty useful. It's honestly very, very useful. At 42 speed, they will keep up with your Marauders and so on, but they will slow down if you're going for a Chariot build. It depends on what type of army you want, though I will say that you probably won't use these too much, it's just kind of specific. Sometimes you need a heavy hitter, but you've got that with so many different things. It's still nice to have, just in case you need it, plus also being unbreakable is quite useful, as you can use them as a bit of a front line. They are squishy, but they can take a good few hits. Now, Fiends of Slaanesh are something very, very special. Ever since I saw their animations, I instantly fell in love. You can see them on screen, they just move around in such a weird way. They're a special unit. So again, armor piercing, very fast Sephora Musk, which by the way reduces the melee attack and melee defense of anything around it which gets hit by it. 95 speed makes them a little slower than your cavalry, but they're still incredibly fast. They're able to do a lot of damage to pretty much anything that they get thrown into. I've been using them as a flanker once again. I mean, you must be tired of hearing that, but yes, this is how Slaanesh kind of works. But they can rip apart a lot of stuff. They're just so pretty to look at. I've literally just thrown them into hordes and just started looking at them. I mean, their animations are just so good. You can see them here, how they're moving. And these are just stationary. They are just wonderful to use. Possibly one of my favorite units in the roster for Slaanesh. That's... yeah, I mean, not even possibly, it's definitely. They're also a bit more durable because they have 30 armor. They are still squishy, keep in mind that. Like, you will start to notice that Slaanesh is very, very squishy, but if you can boost up their capabilities, they can be quite devastating. Personally, I would have also liked if they had Vanguard too, but I can imagine that that would be pretty broken, so yeah, I'm not gonna beg about that. Soul Grinders of Slaanesh look really, really cool. Don't get me wrong, I love the look, but I don't think it's got as much functionality as, say, for example, all the other Soul Grinders, as all the others do have a ranged weapon, even if it's short or long range. It's still something to give you some sort of range, where Slaanesh has nothing whatsoever. It's still pretty good because it's heavily armored. This is the best armored thing that you can have. It's armor piercing, it causes terror, it's got magical attacks too, it's a devastating flanker. It's good. But, I don't know, given the fact that it's got 75 speed, it's a lot slower than your cavalry, it's a lot slower than pretty much a lot of your stuff, anything mounted, of course, it's faster than anything on foot. You can easily doomstack these, but I've really not seen a lot of use. I'll be very, very honest with you, despite the fact that I do love the look. I think it's really nice that we've got loads of different, unique-looking Soul Grinders. But again, I feel like you do have access to some better stuff, especially when we start looking towards the Keeper of Secrets, but I don't know, maybe there's some use for them. They are pretty good at dealing damage and so on, but I just honestly can't justify having an army of them, or even just one or two. I don't see too much of a use for the Soul Grinder of Slaanesh. Especially once you start looking towards the Keeper of Secrets, because, yeah, I know it's got no armor compared, because it's pretty much just wearing a bikini, but it's shielded, it's a spellcaster, it's armor piercing, it's able to do damage. The fact is you get 2 spells from pretty much the beginning, and as you go through the tech tree, you're able to unlock more. I find them to be really, really strong. They're also at 80 speed. They'll be a bit slower than your cavalry, but they will be able to catch up. I've been able to use these as really big monsters. This is my doomstack. The Soul Grinders can be doomstacked because, yeah, the heavy armor and so on makes them quite powerful, but these are my doomstack. They're very pretty. I myself love the new design of them. I know some people aren't keen on it, but this is something that I've wanted for a while. Having big monsters like this that can do damage, move around quickly and catch anything that's gone, and then being able to cast spells while in combat is very, very useful. I've got a Doomstack running around, which is an Exalted Keeper of Secrets and 19 other Keeper of Secrets, and yeah, I mean, it's ridiculous, but it's cool, and it's something that I think everyone should try out at least once. It's fairly expensive though, by the way. You're going to have to try and work on some modifiers to reduce their upkeep as much as possible. But I've genuinely had a lot of fun with fast-moving monsters like this. Keep in mind that being a spellcaster is also very useful, as I've said, but just being so quick is really, really nice. Like, you can do a lot of damage. So Cultists of Slaanesh are quite curious, as this is your mortal hero choice, and what it does is essentially it's a melee character. It's able to summon in some demons and so on. In campaign you can summon up to 3 units of Demonets and 1 Keeper of Secrets, which obviously is very, very useful. Its stats aren't too great. I must say that maybe... Yes, it's geared to kill other heroes and so on because it's a melee fighter, but obviously it's quite squishy too, though it's anti-infantry. It's pretty good, don't get me wrong. However, I've used it more in the campaign as it can build cults and so on for treasury rather than actually using devotees, which is very, very useful. Now, with all that being said, it looks freaking great, and it really has a nice look with the Chaos Steed, which really shows that the Chaos Steed is built for normal-looking mortals, well, barring the little clipping issues and so on, but it's just really, really pretty like that. Campaign-wise, I've brought it with me in case I need some extra support with extra summons and so on, which is very, very useful, but if I realize that it's going to be a cakewalk to, say, for example, attack the Empire or destroy Norska or whatever, I don't bring it along. I just have it floating around in those areas to build cults, just to be able to get some extra devotees. There's multi-purpose to this, I must say. Possibly not so much for battles, though players will differ. It really depends on the actual player itself. Like, it's not useless. I will be very honest, it's very useful to be able to summon in more monsters, especially if you know that you're going to get into heavy combat. But as a fighter itself, maybe if it had access to some various different buffs and so on, it would be a lot better. The cultists could be expanded upon, that's for sure. Not just the cultists of Slaanesh, but the cultists in general. I feel like it would be very useful to be able to buff them up a little bit and give them some kind of battle priest type of abilities. Because as it stands now, some cultists, like for example the cultists of Tzeentch, are clearly better than others due to what they can do. The Allures of Slaanesh is your other hero choice, and these are a lot more useful, I'd say, mainly because you have 2 options, either the Lore of Slaanesh or the Lore of Shadows. They're also quite fast on foot with 42 speed. They're a spellcaster, they've got armor-piercing magical attacks too. You can have them mounted, which makes them really, really fast. They get 100% speed. You can have them on a Seeker Chariot, or an Exalted Seeker Chariot. It's very much depending on your playstyle. If you're going for a lot of Marauders, have them on foot. If you want for a very fast-moving army with loads of hit and run, then you can have them on any of the mounts. The mounts themselves are very useful. I mean, it really much depends on what exactly you want, and they're still very useful. I really like these. They're just so good to move around with. Both laws of magic are really good, and we're going to have a video regarding the spell lore of Slaanesh very, very soon. So I would say that these are probably the go-to, though a healthy mix of both heroes works out quite well. It's again focusing on your playstyle. Every player is different. Perhaps you won't have the same style as I do with the armies of Slaanesh. The Herald of Slaanesh is just like your Allures, as they can have the same laws of magic and the same mounts. This is your generic lord choice, so this is going to be the thing that you're going to be recruiting constantly if you're making more and more armies. It's pretty good. Again, you can focus around, say for example, a foot variant, or you can have them mounted and make them incredibly fast. I honestly have no complaints, mainly because, well, first off, it's your only proper choice. Second off, the laws of magic are very useful. Also, having access to all the locusts like the Allures do makes them much, much better, because that means that you can have some buffs or debuffs. It really much depends on how you want to build them out, and you can mix them, match them with the Allures to be able to get pretty much every single locust ability, or just a lot of the same, depending on how exactly you want it. Now, I will say, this is a bit different to all the other Exalted Keepers, as obviously you don't have access to any flying mounts and so on, so I would say that you are able to just upgrade them to Exalted Keepers without too much of a problem, as, yeah, they're a bit slower, they're 80, but they're still quite fast. You can kind of boost up their speed, so they will be more or less on par with all your other cavalry. They are massive, they're spellcasters too, they're armor-piercing, they're anti-large, they're able to do damage. The fact that the Exalted Keeper is anti-large too is very, very useful, because, yeah, you're going to be dealing with, say, Bloodthirsters, Great Unclean Ones, loads of different other big monsters, so you have a monster which is dedicated to fight other big monsters. It's something which we see more in another universe of Warhammer, and it's translated really nicely here as, yeah, you don't have flyers, you pretty much have no range whatsoever, so some other factions do have some things against you. However, being able to use a big monster to take out other big monsters will give you a little bit of a push against them, so it does balance it out a little bit well. Like I said, I really like the Exalted Keepers, even if they're doom stacking with other keepers or you're leading them as armies. They're very, very cool. I love the look of them. Personally, I just love the look of them. So that's pretty much all my thoughts regarding the uses of the Slaaneshi roster. It's going to take some getting used to. Even I had that issue because, yeah, it's a lot of squishy stuff, but it's a lot of high output damage. So you're going to have to work around with skirmishing combat. You're going to have to work around with overwhelming your enemies from multiple sides. There's a lot of micro here, and if you played them on the tabletop, especially Warhammer Fantasy 8th edition and so on, you're kind of already used to how it works. Obviously, gameplay from Total War Warhammer to tabletop is very, very different, but it has the same philosophy as you want to overwhelm your enemy from multiple sides. It's going to be tough, I will say. It's going to be very different if you're not used to this, but once you get the hang of it, which I'd say a few turns in, you should be fine. I'm enjoying this. It's different, and this is a good thing, obviously, because all the factions are very different, but Slaanesh is probably going to be the one which campaign-wise works normally, but battle-wise, there's going to be a level of you need to relearn some stuff. Obviously, if you've played, like, say, for example, the Wood Elves, or even, say, for example, Bretonnia, which is good at cycle charging and all that, you should be okay. I'd say that if I would have had it any other way, I would have had some Chaos Warriors of Slaanesh, just to be able to have a proper front line, some proper heavily armored stuff to be able to take the brunt whilst you cycle charge. Maybe we'll get that in the future, though it's too early to pretty much just start discussing that. That being said, what do you think about the Seneschal army? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below and let's start a bit of a discussion, as obviously this is the best Chaos God in the lore, you know? We have to discuss her. But with that, my friends, we've come to the end of our video. Thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy the video, might I suggest giving the video a like, or even subscribing to the channel, as it really does help us out. In the description section below are various links to different social media platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, and Discord. Also in the description section is an affiliate link with Element Games where you could buy loads of hobby-based products, not just Warhammer, for 10 to 25% off. Making a purchase using that link and also our special code, which is also in the description, supports the channel at no extra cost to you, which we think is rather cool. A big thank you to our patrons. Your support means the world to us. It's amazing that people want to help a small channel like us grow and get to a higher level of content. A big thank you to Gibraltar LUSC, Ryan Bertsche, Andrew Prince, and Okro for subscribing to us at our Fane level. You guys are super cool. And a big thank you to Edward Yule, VS Vasan, Aaron Whitman, and Shaggy for subscribing to us at our King level. Honestly, we can't thank you all enough. And lastly, a big thank you to all of you for liking, sharing, and commenting on these videos. Honestly, it's because of you guys that the channel's been growing at such a great pace lately, so we can't thank you all enough. But with that, my friends, thank you so much for watching once again, and we shall see you all again very, very soon. Have a good day.